Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking what is honestly a massive cinematic story of corporate strategy gone incredibly wrong. We're talking about a classic local fit failure, a true clash of worlds. We're going to dive right in and explore how a virtually unstoppable retail giant took its incredibly successful US playbook, carried it straight across the Atlantic, and then just watched it totally crumble against European culture and laws. Let's see exactly how an absolute retail empire was forced into a complete surrender.
$1 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. In the world of global retail expansion, $1 billion is a staggering amount of capital to just, set on fire. This number right here is the definitive price tag of corporate hubris. Before we even get into the exact blueprint of what went wrong, I want you to keep this number in the back of your mind. It is the ultimate cost of assuming that what works perfectly in your home country is naturally going to work everywhere else without a single adjustment. It's literally a $1 billion lesson in localization.
So how did this disaster unfold? Well, we can break this blueprint of failure down into 4 distinct chapters. First, the arrogant entry. Second, a massive culture clash. Third, regulatory walls and unions. And finally, the billion-dollar retreat.
All right, let's start with Chapter 1, the arrogant entry or expecting an easy victory.
Picture this. It's the late 1990s, and this corporate behemoth arrives in Germany. They're the biggest retail player in the world, riding high on unprecedented success back in the States. And they step onto German soil, completely underestimating the local market terrain, basically assuming they could just plant their flag and everyone would bow to them. Their initial entry strategy? Pure brute force finance. They just bought up random struggling local chains. But by doing that, they inherited this chaotic, messy mix of different store layouts, incompatible IT systems, and totally fragmented employee cultures. They really thought capital and scale would be enough to instantly dominate. But the reality on the ground was vastly different, because the German market was already fiercely dominated by Aldi and Lidl. Now, these weren't just your standard grocery stores. They were deeply entrenched, hyper-efficient local discounters. They'd spent decades perfecting a ruthless bare-bones model tailored exactly to the German consumer. We're talking about products displayed directly on shipping pallets just to save stocking time. So they weren't entering an empty playing field at all. They were picking a fight with finely tuned local machines that inherently understood the exact price and efficiency expectations of their market.
Moving right along to Chapter 2, a massive culture clash. The American playbook meets German reality.
A global business isn't just about supply chains and capital. At the end of the day, it's fundamentally about people. And forcing a deeply American cultural playbook onto German workers and shoppers, it created a spectacular, incredibly awkward collision. Let's look at 3 specific steps that perfectly outline how to completely alienate a local population. First up, the morning team cheer. In America, starting a shift with a synchronized team cheer is supposed to build morale, right? Well, in Germany, asking reserved, stoic retail workers to chant, stretch, and cheer before stocking shelves was perceived as baffling, deeply uncomfortable, and frankly, embarrassing. Then there was the grocery bagging situation. In the US, having your bags carefully packed for you is a standard customer service touch. But German consumers? They value speed and efficiency at the checkout line. They bring their own bags and want to pack them in a very specific, logical order. Heavy stuff on the bottom, fragile stuff on top. To a German shopper, an American employee taking their groceries and slowly putting them into flimsy plastic bags wasn't a luxury. It was an annoying, slow, and totally unwanted interruption to their meticulously planned routine.
But honestly, the cultural divide becomes most stark when we look at the clash between mandatory smiling and workplace stoicism. The American playbook instructed cashiers to smile warmly at any customer within 10 feet. Now, to an American, that just means friendly, attentive service. But German culture places a massive value on sincerity. So an unearned smile from a complete stranger who is literally being paid to do it, it comes across as deeply inauthentic, suspicious, and honestly pretty unsettling. And it gets worse. This policy resulted in a famous cultural misunderstanding where German male shoppers actually thought the female cashiers were openly flirting with them. Talk about crossing an unspoken cultural boundary of personal space, right? This direct collision between forced American corporate friendliness and traditional German sincerity completely alienated the exact consumers they desperately needed to win over.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, regulatory walls and unions, where the resistance really builds.
Okay, so cultural missteps are expensive, but hitting an immovable legal wall, that is fatal. The German business environment plays by its own incredibly strict rules.
Now, the company's signature competitive weapon, really the core engine of their whole global strategy, was predatory pricing. That's when you use massive capital to set prices extremely low, often deliberately below cost, specifically to bleed out and eliminate local competition. In the US, they use this massive scale to crush competitors and secure monopolies. But in Germany, intentionally selling below cost to destroy your competition is fundamentally illegal. So when the American behemoth tried to deploy their ultimate weapon to drain the life out of Aldi and Lidl, the German legal system immediately stepped in. The courts simply banned their primary strategy. It was a true David versus Goliath scenario, except the referee immediately handcuffed Goliath. The company was completely disarmed by the law.
And alongside the legal barriers of the courts, they ran face first into a deeply institutionalized labor environment, which is heavily guarded by powerful local labor unions, specifically Verdi. The standard American expansion playbook relies heavily on a non-unionized workforce so they can maintain strict centralized control over labor costs. But in Germany, unions are a deeply integrated, highly protected pillar of the corporate landscape. Through a system called works councils, employees actually have a legal, protected right to participate in major corporate decisions. So these American executives, who were totally accustomed to unquestioned top-down authority, suddenly found themselves legally mandated to negotiate with the very cashiers and stockers they were used to dictating terms to. Oh, and get this. When the company tried to introduce an American-style ethics code that banned romantic relationships between employees, a German court literally threw it out, citing severe violations of constitutional civil rights. So the resistance wasn't just coming from competitors or consumers, it was structurally baked right into the nation's laws.
And that leads us to our final chapter, Chapter 4, the billion-dollar retreat, the climax and resolution.
The descent here was incredibly rapid and total. Just look at the timeline. It begins with that arrogant entry, haphazardly acquiring local chains under the completely naive assumption that cash alone could conquer a highly evolved market. Then we hit the brutal midpoint, where they became hopelessly bogged down in a multi-front war, alienating consumers with creepy smiles and unwanted bagging, while simultaneously getting restricted by local courts and fought to a total standstill by empowered labor unions. Bruised by the culture, restricted by the law, and bleeding capital, there was really only one unavoidable resolution. The company was forced into a total surrender. They cut their massive losses, officially retreated, and sold their entire German operations to the local giant Metro AG at a severe deficit. It stands as a complete start-to-finish collapse of a foreign expansion strategy.
So what's the big takeaway here? This billion-dollar loss wasn't just a stroke of bad luck, and it definitely wasn't due to a lack of resources. It was a profound failure of localization. It proves that it really doesn't matter how big your brand is, how widely successful your strategies have been back home, or how much capital you bring to the table. If you force an arrogant entry, ignore the nuances of local culture, and try to bulldoze established regulatory and labor norms, you are actively engineering your own failure. So whatever project, product, or strategy you are building today, you have to ask yourself, are you authentically adapting to the reality on the ground, or are you just assuming everyone everywhere wants your specific brand of grocery bagging? Definitely something to think about.